great
No
deal of money.
scars, nothing, but they're there, you know.
Yeah.
That's a tough life as well.
Charles Bronson was the gruffest, toughest presence in Hollywood, until a single offhand joke turned his calm into pure, simmering fury. Today, we're uncovering the hilarious yet shocking moment that sparked a 30-year grudge, followed by a jaw-dropping twist involving a British criminal who stole his name. Being famous was never meant for Charles Bronson. Charles Dennis Bukowski was born the 11th of 15 children in a dirt-poor coal mining village in Pennsylvania on March 9, 1921. Immigrants from Lithuania, his parents' homeland, lived a life of constant struggle for survival. They couldn't afford decent clothes, so he had to wear his sister's outfit to school when he was just 6 years old due to their extreme poverty. Because he was only fluent in Russian and Lithuanian at the time, he felt like a foreigner, even in his own nation. He had to acquire that harsh, quiet power in order to live, and you can see that in his films. At the tender age of 10, Bronson's father passed away, intensifying an already grim situation. Instead of going to school or playing with his friends, he dove headfirst into the coal mines. 12 hours a day of gruesome, dark, risky, and stifling labor. Never giving up, he continued to haul coal through tight tunnels for under $1 per ton. Even after sacrificing his own clothing to save his younger brothers, he persisted in digging and pushing. Despite everything, he became the first in his family to complete high school. He escaped the mines at the age of 21 and served as a gunner on B-29 bombers over Japan during World War II with the Army Air Forces. He was injured and awarded the Purple Heart on one mission, demonstrating the true risk he faced. He thought that life had improved even while at war. A former self-proclaimed, "I never had it so good," acknowledged this period. People eventually questioned his service, but his records were legitimate. Bronson had been right there. He was eating and sleeping well. This was luxury compared to home. He worked his way through a series of jobs after the war until a chance encounter altered his trajectory. Even though he wasn't an actor, a little theatrical company engaged him to paint scenery. Something clicked, though, as I stood near the stage. It became clear that he has a natural presence once he began taking on smaller roles. Although he remained unassuming, there was an air of mystery around him. Actor Jack Klugman, who was having financial difficulties, was soon his roommate in a cramped New York apartment. With an iron will, he uprooted his life in 1949 and headed for Hollywood. Charles Bronson's face, rough, worn, and molded by a difficult childhood, told a tale of adversity when he first arrived in Hollywood in 1950. He was far from your average starring man. Instead of star power, casting directors saw muscle, a face like stone suited for jobs as villains, thugs, and henchmen, with no lines, no titles, and nothing more than a punch or gunshot to take. Charles Bronson wasn't quite there yet. Charles Bukowski was his given name, but he felt it sounded too foreign during the McCarthy-era Red Scare. As a little act that helped him survive in a town that wanted all its stars to sound, look, and speak the same, he altered it to Bronson, taking it from the Bronson Gate at Paramount Studios. In the early 1950s, Bronson appeared in almost endless films, the type of characters you quickly forget about, like nameless troops and background thugs. He portrayed them all. He was still unnoticed, even while he was standing among the stars. His presence persisted, even though he rarely smiled or spoke. His expression said it all. You don't know me yet, but you will. It was impossible to turn a blind eye to him. With the release of Drumbeat in 1954, that day finally arrived. Captain Jack, a Modoc rebel against the United States government, was portrayed by Bronson in the Western that starred Audie Murphy. The film was based on true events, but Bronson went beyond acting to fully become the character. His countenance conveyed a mix of pride, grief, and anger without the need for many words. Not content to only praise him, one reviewer went so far as to say he stole the entire film. Being the second-string thug was enough for Bronson. At the very end, in that jail cell scene, he revealed a side to himself that Hollywood had long disregarded. A quirky sense of humor, a relatable edge, and an unexpected natural rhythm. Drum beat sat him down at the adult table, and the crowd took note for the first time. After 4 years, Bronson finally got his hands on something truly monumental. His name emblazoned over the billboard. Despite the film's low budget and hasty production, Bronson made Machine Gun Kelly memorable. He gave the role of infamous criminal George Machine Gun Kelly the air of a man whose inner demons are terrorized by the weight of his public image. The dynamic between him and Susan Cabot, who portrayed his cold-blooded lover, was electric. Bronson's expressionless face and icy gaze convey all the necessary information during a single scenario involving a bank heist. Not only did critics enjoy it, they were astounded. It felt genuine, unfiltered, and coarse. Speculation began to circulate that this man might perhaps carry a whole film. However, Hollywood has not yet paid attention. Bronson was still unable to escape the shadows, even with that buzz. After starring in Man with a Camera, he continued to get supporting roles in great films such as The Magnificent Seven, The Great Escape, and The Dirty Dozen. But he never played the lead role. He continued to pursue popularity far into his 40s, long after most performers would have given up. Nevertheless, Bronson was not made to surrender. Europe noticed something different, while American studios paid him little mind. Being calm, collected, and powerful earned him the title of hero in Germany, Italy, and France. Even when he wasn't talking, European filmmakers adored his look, quiet, and the tension he exuded. Long before his native nation did, he became famous to audiences across the sea. Years of struggle have passed. Hollywood was at a loss as to how to handle him. In addition to being unattractive, he was overly ethnic. He once made the joke, and producers agreed, that he resembled a rock quarry that had been dynamited. This is why he was put in roles that did not belong to him. Roles like Mexicans, Greeks, Italians, Native Americans, or anybody else who appeared foreign. When John Sturges cast him as Bernardo O'Reilly in The Magnificent Seven, though, things began to change. Even though he was older than most breakout actors, at 39 years old, this character provided him a fresh perspective. That of a conscience-filled gunman who knew that true bravery was about more than simply guns. In one scenario, he proclaimed to the youngsters of the hamlet that the true heroes were their dads, who toiled away at the land day in and day out without any hope of recompense. Particularly in Europe, where the picture became an enormous success, that subtle strength stayed with viewers. It demonstrated that Bronson could have heart behind his biceps, and it also launched his worldwide career. He got another opportunity to prove he wasn't simply a tough guy 3 years later in The Great Escape. His character, Danny, was a claustrophobe soldier who had to construct tunnels in order to escape from prison daringly. Bronson understood what it was like to be imprisoned underground, having worked in coal mines as a boy, so the dread in his eyes wasn't an act. That genuine terror lent gravitas to the part. The reason director John Sturges chose him was to demonstrate that even the most powerful guy in the room may be susceptible to weakness. Particularly in Europe, where Bronson was quietly establishing himself as a legend, the outcome was indelible. His personal life began to fall apart as his reputation soared. Bronson encountered Jill Ireland on set of The Great Escape and fell head over heels for her. The catch was that she was wed to David McCallum, his co-star and friend. No emotion was concealed by Bronson. As he struggled with the loss of his mother and the dissolution of his own marriage, He startled everyone with a shocking action. It split him apart and altered the course of his life. Ireland and Bronson tied the knot in 1968 and remained a married couple for more than 20 years. Not only was she his wife, but she also appeared alongside him in over a dozen films. They were one of the most famous cinematic couples in Hollywood, particularly in the 1970s when Bronson finally got famous in America, thanks to their partnership. Even in the 1966 English picture The Dirty Dozen, he maintained that stern demeanor, a war picture with an A-list cast with more ego than set space. Bronson didn't help matters by being reticent and emotionally aloof. The set nickname for him was Charlie Sunshine because of his gloomy disposition. But it wasn't only attitude. The shoot was challenging overall. Months of filming were wasted due to delays. He was hauled back from a local pub, barely sober for the following scene, when his co-star Lee Marvin went drunk one day. In spite of all the mayhem, the picture managed to make millions and become 1960's biggest blockbuster. But that group did not contain all winning memories. Being short at 5 feet, 8 inches, Bronson had always felt self-conscious about his stature. During a group scene, his insecurities surfaced. Because of his towering stature, director Robert Aldrich found it comical to position Bronson between Donald Sutherland and Clint Walker, the two tallest performers on site. It was embarrassing and had an instant impact. Everyone took note. Aldrich brushed it off, while Bronson was enraged. For someone who had spent years cultivating an image of being strong, the moment was devastating. It was more than a practical joke. It caused pain. Charles Bronson spent a lot of time supporting hotter actresses in roles that required him to portray scary dudes. Despite his appearances in successful films such as The Dirty Dozen and The Magnificent Seven, he was never cast as the lead. His powerful presence and harsh features were too much. Studios persisted on casting the same stereotypical heroes, and Bronson patiently waited. He was 47 years old, and yet not a major American star by 1968. Therefore, he followed in Clint Eastwood's footsteps and traveled to Europe. Europe, on the other hand, noticed something that Hollywood missed. Power, grit, and genuine presence were more important to them than his physical attractiveness. At that point, France made an approach. Adieu l'ami co-stars Bronson, because Alain Delon, a major performer in Europe, especially requested her. Europe doesn't care about pretty faces, they care about character. The producers were forthright, and the cinemas were alive with anticipation when the film debuted. The French public was completely engrossed. With the film's massive box office success, Bronson finally received his due. His connection with Delon was intense and captivating. Both critics and audiences took note. Not long after that, destiny handed Bronson a second opportunity. Bronson was given the role of an enigmatic harmonica-playing shooter in Once Upon a Time in the West by Sergio Leone, the guy behind The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. A Fistful of Dollars, the part that started Eastwood's career, was offered to Bronson by Leone years before, but she turned it down. Everything had been worth everything for Leone to finally have his guy. It was a smash hit all throughout Europe. It lasted an entire year in Paris. Bronson was present in all the major French, German, and Italian cities. The finest actor Leone has ever worked with, according to him, was Bronson. People couldn't look away from him, his tightness in every gesture, his intense glare. Then followed the gloomy French thriller Rider on the Rain, which cemented Bronson's place in cinematic history and earned him a Golden Globe. Cold Sweat, Violent City, and Red Sun were subsequent hits, all of which complemented Bronson's somber performance approach. Producers penned screenplays just for him. Not only were these parts played, but they also served as showcases for the underrepresented in Hollywood. He was a silent, menacing, morally upright figure in every picture, and viewers adored him for it. Men aspired to emulate him, and women adored him. In the early 1970s, upon his return to Hollywood, he was no ordinary actor. He was a millionaire. $1 million per film was practically unheard of in 1973, when he was making it. Even though most performers start to wane at 52, Bronson was only at the start of his career. British filmmaker Michael Winner was on the team that helped develop Bronson into one of Hollywood's most recognizable actors. Their connection was palpable as they collaborated on several films. The combination of Winner's penchant for brutal brutality and Bronson's deadly calm worked well. From Chatto's Land, their first joint production, things only became bloodier. The creators of Death Wish had other, less cruel intentions. Winner bravely tackled the heavy subject matter, even though another filmmaker had already been considered for the role. He made the most of the film's capabilities. As the embodiment of retribution, Bronson, always the reserved type, won over fans. More and more people turned out to witness, even if critics despised the violence. However, prior to all that, Bronson revolutionized the hitman genre with The Mechanic. He portrayed a cold-blooded killer who spoke very little but moved with terrifying accuracy. Just Bronson, plotting an attack, occupied the roughly 16 minutes of quiet that introduced the picture. Silence, only stress. The impact of complete quiet was demonstrated in the performance. The producers even removed the darker overtones from the original screenplay, which had an openly homosexual connection between the hitman and his apprentice. What was left, though, was formidable. Cold, deliberate murder was elevated to an art form by Bronson. As he had done with several of his films, he went so far as to get an acting role for his wife, Jill Ireland. After his wife was attacked in Chatto's Land, he assumed the role of a half-Apache seeking vengeance. Bronson brought realism to two very different characters in The Stone Killer. A no-nonsense police officer pursuing mafia murders. Things weren't always peachy when they weren't filmed. A crew member was almost killed when one of the stunts went horribly wrong, and the rental vehicle business was so spooked out that they attempted to return the cars in the middle of filming. Even if Michael Winner wasn't a fan, the success of The Quiet Avenger and The Brutal Justice Dealer solidified Bronson's reputation. Such responsibilities laid the groundwork for subsequent events. After then, the true turning moment arrived. Bronson had surpassed Clint Eastwood and Paul Newman as the world's top box office attraction by the mid-1970s, when he was hardly merely a movie star. Unlike other celebrities, Bronson didn't bother to edit his photos. He didn't want to be interviewed or make an appearance for the press, so he merely created movies and remained silent. Death Wish had a large audience. Produced for just $1 million, it made over 10 times that amount. It was at this point that the studios came to the realization that global renown may be more important than local press. As usual, Bronson stared down the camera as if he had nothing to show. For some reason, Bronson just couldn't get out of his position as Paul Kersey in Death Wish. He portrayed an unassuming architect whose world comes crashing down around him after the brutal murder of his wife and attack on his daughter. An individual who despised aggression unexpectedly obtained a firearm. The stunning metamorphosis was compounded by the fact that Bronson was 52 years old. He became the icy, fearless, unbeatable sort of man that many people secretly aspire to be. On the other hand, Bronson had limits behind the scenes. He was adamant that his real-life wife not play the victim. In his conversation with the filmmaker, he expressed his desire for the woman to remain untouchable. That exemplified Bronson, firm but protective. The release of Death Wish set off a chain reaction. This grittier picture about street justice felt more than just a movie at a time when America was hurting from increased crime and broken confidence in government. Critics panned it, calling it dangerous and racist, but audiences couldn't get enough. People yelled "Death Wish" as they exited the movie, indicating their desire to purchase firearms, as if Bronson were actually Paul Kersey, they said upon seeing him on the street. A haze had begun to settle over the distinction between actor and character. Despite writing it as a cautionary tale, the original book's author was appalled by how the people embraced Bronson as a hero. Trash and graffiti littered the streets of 1970s New York, making passers-by nervous to venture out on their own. Bronson entered that realm armed with a concealed weapon and an expressionless gaze. The movie seemed to reflect many people's everyday lives. How profound the effect was that some communities even began referring to themselves as Kersey patrols for protection. Officials in charge of maintaining order started to fear that regular citizens may attempt to impose their will on them. After becoming a symbol, Bronson had transcended his status as a mere movie star. Depending on who you asked, it may have been excellent or horrible. A price was paid for all that glory, though. Neither the limelight nor the new Kersey character were something that Bronson enjoyed. He seems weary of it all in interviews. He described himself as feeling stretched out and twisted, like a funhouse mirror image of himself. While he was at home creating art, fans recognized him for his murderous ways. He preferred solitude and tranquility. Bronson emotionally distanced himself as the sequels to Death Wish became increasingly extreme. "I merely perform the necessary tasks," he said. While playing Death Wish 3, he used machine guns to wipe out gangs. Saying, "It didn't feel real anymore," he continued. It had crossed a line that even Bronson could see. In spite of this, he continued coming back to the part. Bronson played Kersey for 20 years, from the 1974 original to the 1994 final, during which time money and contracts were major talking points. The protagonist's tone and severity escalated with each film. An urban soldier battling crack dealers and warlords emerged from what began as a wounded guy armed with a pistol. A far way from the glitz and glamour of Hollywood is where Charles Bronson's love story started. At the age of 26, he was a coal miner living in poverty when he met Harriet Tendler, a wealthy youngster from a Philadelphia acting school. Even though he was short on cash on their first date, Harriet was captivated by his unfiltered determination. They tied the knot in 1949, even though her dad was worried. They were each other's rock for a long time while Bronson followed his goal and waited for a break that seemed like it would never come. It did, in the end. He became famous because to films like The Great Escape and The Magnificent Seven, but he paid a heavy price for his achievement. Their marriage, which had been founded on selflessness and optimism, started to crumble. They broke up in 1965, when Bronson was just about to become a famous actor. Harriet eventually published a memoir about their life together, honest, not resentful. She recalled him as an imperfect but doting father, an unexpectedly gifted artist, and an inspiration who never gave up. Concurrently, another woman showed up in Bronson's life in the most surprising way. According to rumors, Bronson allegedly told David McCallum, "I'm going to marry your wife," while Jill Ireland was visiting him on the set of The Great Escape. What transpired was 5 years later. Ireland filed for a dissolution of her marriage to McCallum in 1967. 2 years before he wed Ireland, Bronson concluded his own divorce. The couple tied the knot in 1968. Rather than letting his emotions get the best of him, McCallum maintained his composure and said afterwards that he had no ill will against Bronson and Ireland. The two would go on to work together in an unprecedented fashion for almost 20 years and in over a dozen films. The basis of Bronson's career was laid by their friendship, which was more than just love. From 1970 until 1987, Bronson cast Jill Ireland in 15 of his films, making sure she was in nearly every one. Beyond being co-stars, they were inseparable partners. They had an itinerant existence together, uprooting whenever Bronson had a new idea. Regardless, they succeeded. Their existence was a bizarre blend of Hollywood glitz and reality, what with 7 children between the two of them, 2 from Bronson's side, 3 from Ireland's, and 2 they adopted. While Bainbridge, California was their primary residence, they also maintained a Vermont farmhouse and a Colorado winter retreat. While Bronson was busy working, Jill took care of the horses. Bronson had a completely different personality behind the scenes. He was extremely bashful and couldn't even watch his own films. An unassuming side of him preferred painting and family meals over walking the red carpet. He moved around like a guy who still knew what it was like to be cold, dusty, and hungry, despite the fact that he was once the highest-paid actor in the world. His dualism was once encapsulated in an incident that Jill recounted. After she reported that a director had treated her badly, Bronson collectedly approached him and shook him to get him to stop. His fierce devotion and protective nature defined him. However, they were unprepared for what was to come. Jill received her breast cancer diagnosis in 1984. Standing defenseless by his wife's side was the same man who had portrayed violent vigilantes on TV. She bravely battled the illness for 6 years. She was quite vocal, publishing 2 autobiographies and even giving testimony before Congress. She was more than an inspiration. She was a survivor. She died at their Malibu house in 1990. The news broke Bronson's heart. After she was cremated, he put her ashes in a walking cane and never stopped carrying it. She was the center of attention, even among the millions of films. The plot then took a strange turn that Bronson had not anticipated. A British criminal by the name of Michael Gordon Peterson switched his legal name to Charles Bronson in 1987. He did it when he was briefly free, ostensibly to promote his fighting career. Curiously, he had never watched a single Bronson picture. Regardless, the moniker stayed, and Peterson went on to establish a whole new terrible reputation with it. He would earn the reputation of being the most dangerous prisoner in Britain for the following few decades. Peterson's tale quickly descended into chaos. Upon his release, he procured a water pistol, modified it into a makeshift weapon, and coerced an unknown individual into transporting him across town. On New Year's Day, he looted a jewelry store, became associated with the notorious Cray brothers, and boxed illegally. Rearrest occurred just 6 days later, although this time under a different identity than Michael Peterson. Charles Bronson was his name. The UK's penal system became synonymous with anarchy and brutality after adopting that label from a Hollywood icon. Peterson's complete dedication to the performance is the most strange part. He was known for his violent behavior, which he displayed by taking hostages, assaulting security personnel, organizing demonstrations from rooftops, and even demanding a helicopter and tea during one siege. In 1999, he became notorious for his 44-hour hostage stand with an art teacher. The outcome was an indefinite prison term. The majority of his time behind bars has been spent in solitary confinement. His incarceration continues despite many parole hearings, and he will always be associated with a character he never knew and never saw on film. More and more, in 2008, the boundary between the two lifestyles became porous. Bronson, a low-budget picture featuring Tom Hardy as the notorious British prisoner, debuted in cinemas. Hardy met Peterson in person, put on weight for the part, and delivered a terrifying portrayal that garnered rave reviews. Peterson, who saw the film for the first time after a long wait, thought it was fantastic. According to him, Hardy depicted him to the letter. Many people still confuse the actor with the prisoner, failing to remember that one was a Hollywood icon and the other a violent inmate. This is mostly due to the film. Oddly enough, Peterson attempted to distance himself from the reputation that brought him notoriety in the end. The artist Salvador Dali was honored when he revealed in 2014 that he had changed his name to Charles Salvador. Bronson was an unpleasant individual, he remarked. I didn't like him. It was his way of trying to start afresh, even though he was confined in prison. Charles Bronson, the actor, kept his cool throughout. Regarding the strange case of identity theft, he never made a public statement. He may not have cared, or, being a very private man, he may have chosen quiet to show. Unforgettable films, unwavering devotion, and an enduring love story ensured that the real Charles Bronson would be remembered long after the British prisoner had faded from the public eye.